Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University in the News. I'm Jeff Pearson, and this is my co-host,
Stephen White.
Hello, Stephen. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, Jeff. Love it every time we have Jennifer on the show, and we do an in the news episode. I'm always learning great new stuff, and sometimes shocked by some of the stories that we have on here. So excited to hear what Jennifer's got for us today.
Sounds good.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, guys. It's good to be here.
Good to have you. So tell us, what fun stories do we have today?
Well, the first story I have to share with you guys is an interesting article that Zillow has published. Of course, Zillow is the mega super real estate website, and they have lots of interesting articles, and I enjoy skimming through those. But they've published an interesting little study. It's about the most profitable areas of the country for landlords. And they just did kind of a top 10 list, and they looked at a variety of factors that all add up to reveal where a small-time real estate investor can really count on making the most profit every month. So if you guys are ready, I'll give you the top 10 list according to Zillow. It's kind of fun to see if it's, I think landlords might be interested in hearing if there are areas in there or not, or if they're looking to invest in properties, what might be some hot markets. So number 10 is Memphis, Tennessee. Number 9 is Indianapolis, Indiana. Number 8 is Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. Number 7 is Tampa, Florida. Number 6 is Rochester, New York. Number 5 is Denver, Colorado. Number 4 is Cincinnati, Ohio. Number 3 is Tulsa, Oklahoma. Number 2 is Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And the number 1 spot is Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. So what do you guys think about that list?
Well, the first thing that jumps out at me is 6 being Rochester. I'm in Buffalo, New York, so Rochester is a very short drive down the thruway for us, and so I know the area well, and definitely the whole Western New York area has become kind of a hot spot for real estate investors and landlords, primarily because the cost of property and housing is pretty inexpensive, so there's a very low barrier to entry to get in, and obviously I think they're basing this on short-term profits and what the market's getting for rent, and so I think it's a pretty good ratio there in Rochester, New York. So that one jumps out at me, and then of course a handful of Florida. I just know, and even Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. I know from RentPrep and looking at the different areas that we service, and those are huge areas for us. So Florida's a huge rental market, and Texas as well. So those aren't surprising to me either.
It's interesting to see the numbers because Oklahoma City, they have at about $536 a month in short-term property or profit. And then number 10, Memphis, is $242. And between 2 and 3, it goes from Miami at $515 to Tulsa at $396. It skips $400 a month. So there's a pretty big difference between number 2 and number 3.
Yeah, and I wonder what's going on in Oklahoma City that they're able to, grab such giant profits out of there.
Yeah.
So it must be a great housing market there right now for sure. I can't say I've got any personal experience or anything out of that area. I haven't been even through that area in such a long time, but maybe it's an up and coming or booming area right now.
Yeah, that could be. And just to clarify, this is for short-term, month-to-month profitability. And, they talk about for longer-term, San Jose, right here in California, would be a good place to go. Because you're looking at, what did it say? $89.27 per month for rental income. But you also have to look at the high cost of getting into the property here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know about Jennifer where you're at in Utah, but here in, like I said, Western New York, it's not uncommon at all to see a $40,000 or $50,000 house go on the market that's habitable. Like you can move into it. which is crazy. I know, especially Jeff in your area. I mean, $40,000 probably. I don't know what you could buy, but probably not much.
No, there's nothing
Um,
available here anywhere
yeah,
close to that.
yeah. So I mean, obviously, the $40,000-$50,000 houses aren't exactly in the most desirable neighborhoods, but just kind of gives you an idea. I mean, like I said, the barrier to entry is very low. And when your overhead or when your mortgage, especially, is that low on a house, your possibility of having much larger profits are definitely there. So here it's good. How is it in Utah?
Well, I think what struck me about this list and why maybe some Utah spots aren't on here, the criteria you can really kind of see it. You have to have those affordable properties in areas that kind of have a more stable or higher than average market rate for the rent. In Utah, you can get some houses, really inexpensive houses, but the rent isn't really as high as in other places in the country. So I think probably what Zillow's little formula here was they were looking at these really affordable places, like you said, that can support a real stable rental
Hmm.
level. I'm also noticing that there's not places that were really kind of the hardest hit by the housing crisis, except for Florida.
Hmm.
You're not seeing Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, California, those places that were, really hard hit. And so that sort of feeds into that scenario I just described, where you need an affordable property with a higher than average sort of rental rate. So I think that's interesting to kind of look at it through that lens.
Yeah, and again, Rochester, New York jumps out at me as one of those areas where there's so many things going on in Rochester, especially right now. They've got a hospital that's a really big notable hospital in the area, and I think nationally strong memorial. And you got a number of pretty good colleges around in that area. So Rochester is one of those places where it's kind of a joke in our area where you could be on a street in a really nice neighborhood in Rochester and make a left turn and be in it feels like you're in a whole different world. And I think that's probably indicative of what the numbers would represent. I think because of everything that they've got going on there, they're probably able to, you know, get a pretty good rental rate, on average. So I think that is definitely helping the numbers there. So I'm sure it has a lot to do with, what's in the area and the type of people you're attracting. I think most of these places are all what I would consider, good places that it's going to attract people who are willing to pay a higher rent too.
Right.
It is interesting to look at and something worth paying attention to for people that are looking to do some additional investing. And again, that was on Zillow.com, and I'm sure we'll have a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, and I agree with Jennifer. Zillow's a great resource. Not only their blog, where she got this article from, their forum is great to go on, check stuff out. So, plug for Zillow there. Zillow's a good resource. I don't have any personal experience listing a house on Zillow or anything, or finding one. But I know just as a resource and somebody who looks for content, that's a great place.
I agree.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, Jennifer, what have we got next?
Oh, this story comes to us from Alaska, and I just had to just laugh and read it again to make sure I read it right. This has to do with a landlord in Juneau who wants to use DNA testing to solve a crisis on his trailer park property. Essentially, this Juneau landlord, he wants to use DNA to solve the case of clogged sewage pipes. Apparently, some residents have been flushing feminine hygiene products and causing lots of trouble. And so apparently, this landlord sent out a notice that basically said that they're considering doing DNA testing to find out which tenants
Oh,
are
goodness.
causing the havoc with the pipes. Um, I just I just had to laugh. Obviously, tenants wouldn't be required to submit to a DNA test or anything like that, but I could just sense the frustration of this poor landlord
Right, right.
and trying to figure it out. Anyway, what do you think of that?
Well, it's something we talk about a lot. Landlords that let their emotions get the best of them, and definitely dealing with something like this. I mean, I can, like you said, you kind of sympathize with the landlord and say, yeah, I know where you're coming from, but obviously you can't subject your tenants to a DNA test. But
Right.
I'm sure his motive was to to stop them, to try and get them to stop doing it. But that's it brings up a great point of how incredibly frustrating it is sometimes dealing with these type of situations where it's just plain destruction, and it's usually just a lack of not even common sense, just common, appreciation for the property that they don't have, and so they're doing things that you would hope to God they wouldn't do in their if they owned the home.
Well, you have to wonder, is the landlord just putting up some kind of a threat? Was that really their intention, was just to make people stop and take notice? Because it does seem pretty far-fetched to think that you're going
Right.
to do DNA testing to figure out who's throwing stuff down the toilets.
Right.
For the most part, seems kind of ridiculous.
And of course, then you always have the possibility of creating that backlash where a tenant might say, well, here's for your DNA test, and then shove a whole handful of Q-tips down the, the toilet or
Right.
whatever. You know, they just want to make a point that they're not going to be bossed around. I could see that happening too. So that could have a backfiring effect on you there. But I've heard such horror stories, especially at landlord association meetings and everything. I think Jeff and I talked about one time this one story where a tenant dumped a bag of concrete down the toilet and ended up
Oh, no.
yeah, it ended up obviously, turning the pipes into concrete. They ended up having to dig them out in the yard, which went through the driveway and ended up turning into a $27,000 fix. So it's a huge problem, and especially putting stuff down the toilet. You'd think by now that they would come up with some sort of contraption to prevent certain things from going down. I don't know. You just think that in today's day and age that a Q-tip couldn't do so much damage, but it definitely does.
Yeah. And then the other thing with them, the landlords putting out this threat is, you start to think about the tenants in that place. Are they going to continue staying there, or are they going to look for someplace else to go when their landlords or property management company is making those kinds of threats?
Right. Well, depending on what what his whole portfolio looks like, and what type of people he's got living in there, that may get the desired result. He may want that, so he might want
Right.
us. He might want to have them all leave and kind of start from scratch, and have part of his screening process. Do you know what to flush down a toilet or something? I don't know.
Mhm.
Making sure that he doesn't run into the same problem over and over. But I agree with Jennifer. Just you could sense the frustration. And just skimming through and looking at the article, it's something that he's dealt with, for a long enough time that he was probably just fed up with it.
Yes. And one of the things that landlords should keep in mind is when you do something like this, it can, one, get picked up by the news,
Hmm.
and or two, end up on social media. So somebody might put into a Yelp comment that this landlord is such a pain, they've threatened to do DNA testing on objects put down the toilet.
Right.
And that's not going to go away.
Yeah, that seems like a good measuring stick. Stop for a second and think to yourself, can I imagine this in the news episode on RentPrep? Because if so, I'm not gonna do it. I don't. That should be your goal as a landlord, to not make the news, or like you said, have something go viral on social media because of how ridiculous your idea is, or a comment that you might make. So yeah, you definitely don't want to have this stuff picked up by the media, and it's not going to be easy for this landlord moving forward. To try and find real eager tenants to move in, I'm sure.
Yes. Well, great. Stephen and Jennifer, I think that wraps up another episode of In the News. Jennifer, thank you so much for bringing us a couple more great articles, and we'll look forward to talking again next week.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University, and remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at thementorimpact.com.